Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host John. I know it's been a hot minute since I've put out an episode and I'll get to talking about that in a moment. But this episode is going to focus mainly on what myself and Hannah did at the UK Games Expo 2022, and we took some video footage with Hannah's new GoPros while we're there that we'll hope you will enjoy while you're listening to this. Okay, so myself and Hannah were lucky enough to be invited back to take part in Games on Demand, run by our friend Lloyd Jan for this UK Games Expo 2020. And essentially, it's where you get a number of GMs running 2-hour taster slots of various different games. There's normally a bit of a theme that most of the games tend to follow, and we were going for space opera this time. So we got a suite as part of the deal for doing all the GMing, which was very nice of the organisers indeed, at the Hilton in Birmingham, where it takes place near to the NEC. But we wanted to get down there a day early on the Thursday rather than just the Friday, the Saturday and the Sunday when the convention runs, because we had a couple of friends and whatever we'd like to talk to and hook up with before we actually spend most of our time GMing. So I booked us into a Premier Inn. Everything's Premier but the prices, not sponsored obviously, and we travelled down there by train because I didn't want all the hassle of driving and stuff like that. The train down there was absolutely packed. It was a little bit ridiculous. I mean, nothing compared to the train on the way back, but I'll talk about that later on. But eventually we did arrive at the NEC, and then we just had to schlump all of our stuff over to the Hilton first and then onto the Premier Inn, which is a fair old distance away. Okay, so we've just turned up and checked into the Premier Inn after walking over from the NEC, getting our lanyards and stuff like that. I've just been strapped into the titty cam by Hannah. Sure you can see why it's called that. And by the miracle of seamless editing, we're going to cut to that now as we walk back over to the NEC and the Hilton. Okay, so we've just got to the Hilton. Hopefully, if I filmed it right, there'll be a bit of time-lapse stuff on the tutu cam preceding this. But obviously, because there's loads of people around, we've switched it off now, so we're just filming a bit on this. Might do a bit of filming later. We're just going to see who's about and what's going on. Then at some point later on, after we've eaten and whatever, we'll probably head back to the Premier Inn. Then we're going to come all the way across here tomorrow morning at some point to check into the Hilton for the 3 days we're actually GMing. So, there we go.
So, UK Games Expo.
Yeah, indeed.
We're here for Games on Demand, where John is GMing. We've been sponsored by the amazing What Did I Miss?, which is an online magazine about tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, it's a listing of newly published tabletop RPGs. I've been kind enough to sponsor us for this, so thank you very much for that, guys. We're just having a break. We've just done our first game of the day. I've ran White Star for the 3rd time. Great group of players. They really seem to enjoy it. They're coming back in a few moments. Bit of a snafu with the booking system where they set us up for 4-hour slots instead of 2 hours, and by the time it had been changed, people had already booked it. But we're muddling through. Lloyd's admirably captaining the ship through choppy waters.
Huge thanks to Lloyd for organising all this again.
Obviously, I've got the groups that were really great that I've just done the game for. They booked for the 4-hour one, so they're coming back for the next slot. You know, so we can make sure they get the amount of time gaming that they've played for. And I'm either going to run them through a different game, or we're going to have them play the same characters but with a different scenario, whatever they prefer, and hopefully we'll have a good time with that. So,
right, best get to it.
Yep. So as I said earlier before the pre-recorded stuff, the theme of the UK Games Expo this year was space opera, and all of our games didn't have to be do with that, but I really wanted to throw myself into it, partly as a challenge to myself because I mostly run fantasy stuff. Now I took 4 games with me. I took Fate Accelerated, White Star, ICRPG, and the Hyperspace D6 hack of the old West End Games Star Wars D6 version. And for each of these games I came up with a different sort of space opera scenario. The Fate Accelerated one was people on a generational ship waking up from cryo tubes to find there's like a predator-like alien hunting them on board the ship. The ICRPG was for Warp Shell, and it dealt with a huge monolith appearing in orbit of the PC's home planet and sort of wrecking the environment, and how they dealt with that. The White Star had the PCs as a band of space freebooters in a sort of Firefly style, trying to do a train heist. And the Hyperspace D6 had the PCs as bounty hunters being hired by a Hutt crime boss to bring in a fugitive who turned out to be more than they expected. And then the main sort of crux of the scenario was, do they turn the guy into the Hutt? Do they sympathise with him? Do they help the Empire to bring him in? You know, just what do they do once they've found out this information? And the way it works at Games on Demand is each of the GMs has a number of games, and you get allocated people to fill up your table. And the way I normally do it is I just sort of say, these are the scenarios I've got and the games they go with. What do you guys fancy playing? Now, some groups were like, yeah, we like that scenario, we want to try this particular system. Others weren't so sure. In a few cases, I was like, well, if you can't decide for yourself, we could always just roll a dice to decide it. That did lead to me running White Star about 3 or 4 times straight away, which was fine, and it let me get a really good grasp on the scenario, because obviously as a GM, even though you're running ostensibly the same sort of one-shot scenario, you pick up little things as you run it, and you sort of hone that scenario as you go along. As I said in the pre-recorded segments, I had a group come in for White Star who, due to the booking snafu, had booked for 4 hours instead of 2, and they played through the White Star scenario in 2 hours. They then came back and I said to them, right, do you want to try a different game, or do you want to keep these characters? We'll level them all up really quickly, and I'll adapt one of the scenarios from the other games to use the White Star rules, sort of on the QT, so to speak. And they basically said, oh yeah, we'd love to like level up these characters and carry on playing the group we did previously. So we did that very quickly, which was fine because it was White Star. They got like a few more hit points and they got to keep a few bits of equipment from the first game, and more importantly, the deeds to basically half a planet that they'd stolen. We then bounced them into the Hutt Crime Lord scenario, where we cast the Hutt Crime Lord as the owner of the other half of the planet, and he was trying to consolidate them into part of his criminal empire, and he wanted to get them to like sort of prove their loyalty by like tracking down this potentially force-sensitive fugitive that was on the run from the Empire. And that was all manner of craziness, so we just sort of like welded them together. But it was pretty easy because White Star's based on the old sort of BX system, which I'm pretty familiar with, and it also takes inspiration from loads of different sci-fi elements, Star Wars included, so it wasn't really difficult to adapt like Jedis and Hutts and droids and stuff like that to feature in it. And that seemed to go really well. I also ran the Fate scenario a few times, where they were being hunted by this predator-like alien on board a generational ship, having just woke up out of cryo sleep and not really knowing what was going on. And that was great fun. Everyone really seemed to enjoy it. I love the fact that in each of the groups that we ran the game for, there was one person who always sort of like twigged onto the fact it was a predator like really quickly, to the point where in the game I ran last of that particular system and scenario, when they'd captured the predator, they'd caught it in a crossfire, its stealth systems were down, they riddled it full of bullets, there was like fluorescent blood everywhere, it collapsed to the deck plate and it was blatantly breathing its last. One of the guys was like, oh, you might want to put some blast doors around that, or like get a lid on that quickly. And obviously not wanting to disappoint, I responded to that by going, oh yeah, he's lying on the ground. He starts messing around with some device on his wrist, and these strange red flickering different symbols start appearing on it. And the guy was like, I told you. And then we had the whole panic of them trying to like wrestle this half-dead predator into a stasis booth and get the AI computer to like eject it as an escape pod into space before it blew up. And that was a really fun, satisfying end to that particular session. And even though the people there hadn't really played Fate, because it was Fate Accelerated, it was pretty easy, and I did sort of speed through some of the stuff, obviously, because 2 hours, you want to get on and enjoying the game. You don't want to get too sort of hung up in like system details, which is why I generally tend to take sort of simpler systems to games on demand, or I'll try and streamline the systems as I'm running them. Now, unfortunately, this year we weren't able to stay until the final slot of games. There was only 2 slots open on the Sunday, but due to just how things had happened to work, I was starting a new job on Monday, so I had to make sure I got back in plenty of time, so I'll be all prepared and ready for that. So we decided to skip out just before the last slot. Obviously, I told Lloyd about that as soon as I could, and he was fine with that. Thanks very much for that, Lloyd. But I really had a great time running the rest of the games. It was great fun. Now, as I said earlier, unfortunately, on the train on the way back, due to an electrical storm or something knocking out some of the signals, our train back was delayed. It only had a few cars on it, and it was absolutely heaving on the way back. We were literally stood in the aisles, and you could barely move at all. And unfortunately, when myself and Hannah got back, I started my new job. Everything's going great, and then about halfway through the week, I started feeling a little bit ill. Working from home for most of the week, just did the Monday at the new job, did a bit of training, etc. And then I was working from home for the rest of the week. Started feeling even iller as the week went on. Did a COVID test, lo and behold, COVID positive. So I've been pretty much isolating and retesting ever since, which luckily, because of my work, they were very understanding, I'm able to do. But on the way back in that crammed ass train, I said to Hannah, we'll be lucky if we don't get anything due to the close confines of this. And that was an entirely unpleasant journey back. However, luckily we're both sort of recovering now, even though we're having to self-isolate this week, which is why I've sort of not been doing the podcasting, because my voice has been almost non-existent for the last week. I'm very hoarse when I have been able to talk, but started to get a bit better now, so I wanted to put out this episode to say how much, despite all the sort of illnesses and stuff afterwards, how much I'd really enjoyed UK Games Expo 2022. It's very tiring because you're running a lot of games. I don't know how Lloyd manages to run all the games and do the organisation and stuff like that on top of it. Luckily, Hannah comes along and she's willing to step in and run a few games, to sort of help people out, and she helps with a lot of the organisational stuff. So that's really great. But if you ever get a chance to go along to the UK Games Expo, I highly recommend you take it. And if whilst you're there, you find yourself at a bit of a loose end, then wander along to the main desk and say you want to pick up some tickets for games on demand. They're normally pretty cheap. You get 2 hours of gaming, you get a sort of a bit of a choice of systems, and you just get to try out some new games with people you may or may not have gamed with before, new GMs. And like I say, you don't really have to book them massively in advance as you do with some of the other games that tend to sell out very quickly. And also, if you're just at a bit of a loose end, 2 hours isn't really much of a commitment, is it? You can do that while you're waiting for another game, or while you're waiting to meet up with someone in the bar at the Hilton or something like that. Either way, definitely keep an eye out for the games on demand signs. They tend to tuck us away in one of the suites in the Hilton, so you have to do a bit of looking around for us. But there's normally some big ass signs sort of pointing roughly in the right direction towards us. And like I say, Lloyd always tries to get the best out of his GMs, and he really does push the boat out to make sure everyone's having a good time. So the only other thing I want to mention, besides saying to all my fellow GMs, everyone involved in the organisation, all the volunteers, all the players and everyone like that, thank you for creating such a wonderfully enjoyable convention experience for myself and seemingly everyone else who was there. Very much appreciated. I also wanted to mention a company called Geek and Son, who do handcrafted geek furniture. You can check them out at www.geekandson.com. And this isn't just a gratuitous plug, all right, maybe a bit, but genuinely these guys were real stars. I was scrabbling around looking for some extra D6s for my Hyperspace D6 games, since I had a few people turn up without any. Hannah, bless her, sort of ran across to the trade hall with the idea of, like, I'm going to buy some cheap D6 sets and bring them back for the game. So I've got them ready, and I was like, I can limp along with the ones I've got until you get back. And Geek and Son had a huge sort of vat, I suppose you could call it, of these handcrafted wooden D6s. And obviously Hannah asked if she could have a few, and they basically gave her a big handful of these D6s for free, and we're like, there you go, have fun, give us a mention if you do. Great stuff. So really appreciated, guys. As I say, that's Geek and Son at www.geekandson.com. They do handcrafted geek furniture, and I'm hoping they sell these big wooden D6s on their website, because they are really, really nice. And I thoroughly enjoyed using them for my game of Hyperspace D6, in that one of your D6 dice pool has to be the sort of Destiny dice, which, you know, it explodes if you get a 6. So I basically just handed each person one of these big wooden D6s, and that was their Destiny dice, and it was very distinctive and easy to spot. So thanks again to the guys at Geek and Son for sorting us out with that. And just to reiterate what I was saying a few moments ago, if you're in the UK and you get a chance to go along to the UK Games Expo next year or in the future, I highly recommend you give it a go. I know it's been a bit difficult with conventions and stuff recently with COVID. Like I say, I've tested positive recently, and I'm sort of recovering from it now. However, I would not have missed the Games Expo for the world. Both myself and Hannah really enjoy it, and I know she wanted to get in on this podcast / YouTube episode. Like I say, unfortunately, she's sort of still in the sort of being hit a bit harder by COVID than myself, but we're both all right in the grand scheme of things, thanks to injections and jabs and whatever. It could have been a lot worse. So she's recovering from that, but I wanted to put out this video because it's a bit late already, and I want to get back to trying to do a bit of podcasting, and now my voice has come back. So that's it. That's all I've got to say about the UK Games Expo 2022. Although, if and when Hannah's up and about, I might do another episode where we both share our sort of insights on it, and we have a bit of banter back and forwards between us. So keep an ear out for that. Right, if you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe tell us what you like about cons, tell us about your own experience at UK Games Expo, whatever, as long as it's to do with tabletop RPGs, then you can get in touch with us a number of different ways. You can leave us a voicemail message using SpeakPipe or Anchor. There'll be a link in the description of this episode, or you can send us an email to oddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.